We're going to call this episode Kefi D Cop Eration. Okay, everybody. It's Michael Douglas Carlin here, a.k.a. Rapping Fool, a moniker given to me by Reggie Wright Jr. himself for my song Tupac's Revenge. If you guys get a chance, check it out. It's on YouTube. And now it's time for me to weigh in officially on Kefi D. So Kefi D confessed to the murder of Tupac. And really what he did was he confessed to being an accessory to the murder. He handed the gun to Orlando Anderson. And he said it on a recording, and he wrote it in a book. Now it turns out Orlando wasn't the shooter. Orlando wasn't in the car. Orlando was sitting at the bar with Corey Edwards. Orlando at some point goes to the hospital for his dislocated shoulder, which he had a trick shoulder. So, that's pretty much known. So he was confessing back then to something that wasn't known. Because don't forget, Orlando Anderson's deposition, very few people ever saw that. Orlando Anderson's lawsuit against Felony and the fact that he was about to settle, very few people have ever seen that. So it wasn't widely known back when he made his confession, the first confession that was supposedly the proffer. And we're going to get into that later. But law enforcement loves to coerce testimony. And how do they do it? I will get you out of this if you'll just flip to my story and say such and such. That's what they love to do. So now Kefi D has been charged with this confessed crime. So now the prosecutors and the judge, they want to see Kefi D locked up. All law enforcement also wants to see him locked up. They presented a nice, neat little package that's going to wrap this up with a beautiful bow, just like a Christmas present. Now, what makes this worse for Kefi D is that he's written a book that punks the entire legal system with his tales of selling 300 kilos a month of cocaine, and that he's riding around buying cases of Cristal and Dom Perignon, throwing cash around and gambling, living like a king, and law enforcement sees all of this and could never catch him. In that book, he confessed perhaps thousands of crimes, and he made the cops, the DAs, and the judges look stupid. So now they really want to get him. So let's remember, though, that the easel, the canvas, the paintbrushes, and the paint are all owned by the legal system. Now, why do I say that? Well, let's look at a few cases. Wayman Anderson was in Mississippi at the time a murder was committed in Los Angeles. His alibi was video evidence that he was singing in front of 2,000 people at a mega church. That evidence was excluded, and eyewitnesses placed him at the scene of the crime. Now, mind you, there's zero physical evidence ever linking him to that crime, and all of these eyewitnesses have since recanted and said that they were coerced by cops to testify against Wayman to get off on some legal beef of their own. Doesn't that sound familiar? That sounds like the Kefi D proffer statement. Now, Wayman sits to this day in prison for a crime he did not commit. 30 years of his life has been taken by cops that coerced evidence and prosecutors and a judge that kept his alibi out of the trial. And this time, this 30 years, is something that he is never going to get back. Now, another case, Omar Bradley. He was convicted of embezzling a bowl of oatmeal. He appeals the verdict and he gets it overturned only to be tried a second time and convicted again for embezzling a bowl of oatmeal. Now, in America, we're supposed to have double jeopardy, meaning you cannot be tried for the same crime twice. But that applies, and the Constitution applies to everybody in America except for Omar Bradley. His real crime was shutting down the corrupt Compton Police Department and interrupting the LA power structure of their drug profits. And the smoking gun of this is 96 kilos of cocaine that are missing from the evidence locker at Compton PD, as well as thousands of guns, including the gun that likely shot Tupac Shakur. Now, at the time, Compton PD had 6 police helicopters. One of those Compton police helicopters crashed, and strewn throughout the crash site are kilos of cocaine. They were using the helicopters to transport the cocaine. And we're going to get into that a little more too. Now, Michael Duro Sr. sits in prison, innocent for the crime he's convicted of committing. Why? Because his wife was having an affair with Reggie Wright Sr., and Reggie needed him out of the way. He needed Duro out of the way, so Duro had to go to prison so that Reggie could continue the affair. So Duro gets a murder pinned on him. Now, Michael Duro Jr., okay, this is Orlando Anderson's best friend. He's in the car with Orlando Anderson when Orlando was killed. Duro had just been picked up from the hospital where he was drugged up. He had just had a surgery and he was released from the hospital. Now, the shooting happened at the car wash right near Mom's Burgers. They went there to get food. It was Orlando's grandmother's day of her death. They had called ahead and ordered food. So there were people that knew that these guys were going to show up over at Mom's Burgers. So when this shooting happened, eyewitnesses said he never touched a gun. He's tested for gunshot residue, and he tests negative. There was no gunshot residue on his hand because he never touched a gun. If he had even picked up a gun that had fired, he'd have gunshot residue on his hands. Now, there were eyewitnesses that said there were also other shooters than the Stone brothers in Orlando. There were Compton police that were 3 blocks away, and they said when they arrived a minute after the shooting that Reggie Wright Sr. was already there, like he had been there. So now if there's other people shooting besides the 3 guys that get murdered, what can you infer by that? Now, a friend of the Wrights is named Officer Reynolds, and he's alleged to have said that Tupac, Orlando confesses to the murder of Tupac before he passes away. He says, I killed Tupac, and then he dies. And that's what we had heard, right? And it was supposedly Reynolds that said that. But eyewitnesses said that Orlando was killed almost immediately. So many bullets, so much blood, he died immediately. He was dead when those other cops got on the scene a minute later. Now, in 2017, which was good news for Michael Duro, the felony murder law changed. Now, Michael Duro should have been immediately released from prison. His attorney now, Robin Yanes, is trying to get him out of prison. Now, keep in mind, Robin Yanes is the same attorney that represented Reggie Wright Jr. and Reggie Wright Sr. in their drug cases out of Tennessee. So is he really there to help Michael, or is he part of the cover-up for the Reggies? Well, soon we're going to know. We're going to know whether he botches that case, because it's straight up. Michael Duro must be released because there's no gunshot residue on his hands and he never touched a gun, and the felony murder law changed. He should be released immediately. So we're going to see what happens. Now, Suge Knight had every card dealt from the bottom of the deck in this most recent case, which is the murder of Terry Carter. Now, normally in something like that, whoever committed the original felony is the one that gets charged with the whole thing. And that would be Cleabone Sloan, because he's the one that assaulted Suge when Suge was in the car. There was an officer named Biddle that was the investigator at the One Oak, West Hollywood attempted murder case, and Suge Knight was the victim in that. And then Biddle, instead of investigating the murder attempt of Suge at One Oak, said he was going to take Suge Knight down. Now, why would the investigator come up to the victim of a crime and say that? Well, he's friends with Reggie Wright Jr., Reggie Wright Sr., okay? There's a tight little group here. So when the video evidence comes in that case at the One Oak nightclub where there's 37 cameras, an off-duty sheriff was seen on that video handing the shooters the gun and letting them into the club, and then he takes them to the airport the next day. Now, that sheriff should have been immediately fired, but instead he remains on the force for a year after this discovery. Then Biddle shows up as the investigator at the Tams Compton crime scene. Now, this is a severe conflict of interest. Biddle should have never been the investigator, and he certainly shouldn't have been the investigator because he had it in for Suge Knight. He should have been removed from that case, but that wasn't what happened. Now, when I was working with Russell Poole, we found out about the off-duty sheriff, and Russell spoke to the homicide investigator that we were supposed to meet with and confirmed that this information was true. And Russell said to the homicide investigator that this was a huge conflict of interest and that they should cooperate with Suge Knight and solve the two biggest mysteries in the history of music instead of pursuing this dog case against Suge Knight, which was a dog case. He was a victim at one, and he was actually the victim being assaulted when he fled the scene. But now, keep in mind, this is called Murder Burger. It's not Tam's Burger in Compton, it's Murder Burger. Why? Because there was a gentleman that was right there at the exact same spot where Suge was sitting in his truck that was shot 17 times. And if you know anything about the history of Compton, you know about this, and you know it's called Murder Burger for a reason. So Suge was justified when he hit the gas. It's not what everybody wants to hear because everybody wants to hate on Suge Knight, but he was justified. And in the civil case, it was found out through witness testimony that there were two guns there, which Suge said he saw. He said he saw a gun and he hit the gas. And he was justified in running over Terry Carter. Y'all don't want to hear that, but he was justified in running over Terry Carter because they were trying to kill him. Now, at the very end of Suge Knight's situation there, when he took his plea deal, I got him an attorney. That attorney tried to visit his client, which was Suge Knight. He was hired by Suge Knight to come in and represent him. And he was barred from representing him. They played 3-card money with him. Nope, you have to go over to the sheriffs and you have to get approval from the sheriffs. Nope, you have to go get approval from the judge. Nope, you got to get approval from the DA. You have to fill out this form. He goes to fax the form. His number's blocked on the fax machine. I mean, every card that they could deal Suge Knight in that case was dealt from the bottom of the deck. And so Suge Knight did not get a fair trial. He didn't get good representation in his murder beef that he has taken a plea deal for. Now, also, Suge Knight fired his attorneys in the case. He wanted to represent himself, and he was barred from doing so by the DA, and the DA colluded with his attorneys, one of which was, by the way, David Kenner, and they did all kinds of protective orders so that Suge Knight couldn't see anybody, couldn't get phone calls, and they did everything they could behind Suge's back to derail his case. So when the attorney was hired, there was no way for him to actually see Suge Knight. Now, why were they trying to cram down Suge Knight and make him take his plea deal? Because 10 days after Suge Knight takes his plea deal, the felony murder law, the same one that benefits Michael Duro, changed. And Suge Knight could have never even been tried for that crime because Suge Knight had no intent to kill Terry Carter. He was simply trying to flee, and there had already been an incident by Cleabone Sloan, which was the assault. That's the original felony. So Suge Knight couldn't even have been tried for that crime had he not taken his plea deal. That's why they crammed him down at the end of that situation. And so every single card that could possibly be dealt to Suge Knight was dealt from the bottom of the deck, and it was corrupt cops and a corrupt system that made this happen. And Biddle has ties through the sheriffs to Reggie Sr. and Reggie Jr. Now, Keefe D was in the Compton corruption report. That Compton corruption report was a 96-page document that details the 96 kilos missing from the evidence locker, the guns that were missing from the evidence locker, and all kinds of malfeasance going on at the city of Compton in the police department. And Reggie Wright Jr. was in Keefe D's pay-o book. They knew each other even back then, and I think Reggie's even admitted that they knew each other, in childhood. And LAPD detective Fred Miller said Reggie controlled the drug trade in Compton. Now, LAPD also has a 70-page report that was put out by the LAPD Professional Standards Bureau entitled Reggie Wright Jr. Criminal History, Inquiry, and Transcript. And that piece of evidence was withheld from the attorneys by the LAPD in the Christopher Wallace civil trial in the wrongful death suit. And now we know that Reggie was, for a fact, in the drug trade because of the case that he and his father caught out of Tennessee. Reggie Wright Sr. and Jr. always wanted to know where the raids were happening so that they could conduct pre-raids, and that's part of that 96-page corruption report. And we know from Kevin Hackey that Reggie and Burrell were known to rob drug dealers of their drugs and their cash. Now, why do you rob drug dealers of drugs? Well, you're going to just throw those drugs away? I don't think Reggie's a drug user, so he didn't need those. But what are you going to do? Well, probably going to sell them. So, who else do we have in this whole mess? We got Greg Kading, and he's another corrupt cop. Every case he ever touched should be overturned, or at least looked at severely to overturn it. Why? He lied, and those lies led to the overturn of a conviction in the George Toros Ramos case. He was admonished for having reckless disregard for the truth, which is an official term, legal term. And now his lies are growing in stature. He's now claiming that he was the original detective in the Tupac murder case. Now, who best to write the LAPD cover-up book? A known liar and perjurer. So, what does that mean for all of us? What is it that we're going to do? So, as I said about Greg Kading, every case that any of these corrupt cops ever touched needs to be evaluated. So, there are many innocent men and women that are sitting in prison right now because of these corrupt cops. And there's those of you out there that have loved ones in prison in cases where these corrupt cops put them away. If you know of anyone sitting innocent in prison by Greg Kading, Reggie Wright Jr., Reggie Wright Sr., or others implicated in all of this mess, those cases must be looked into. The corrupt cops must be called to testify again, and that testimony must be evaluated in light of what we know about their corruption. The corrupt cops should be forced to testify under oath again. People that are innocent in prison must be released, and as punishment, the system must pay out restitution to these wrongly convicted inmates. The crowd needs to get involved to collect every case they touched, file freedom of information requests in every jurisdiction, collect information, and get the innocent freed. And as we'll start to see from people being freed in these other cases, we'll identify patterns of behavior that we'll be able to see how this works in relation to Tupac and Biggie. And that brings us to the Tupac and Biggie murders. All of you out there that follow me and my channel, I would just say this. Videos right now are already going missing off the internet as these corrupt and shady cops cover their tracks. Now, right now, every video of Vlad, Bomb First, Kading must be downloaded. Every interview they ever did should be archived so that we preserve all of the evidence to put them all in a goldfish bowl. If you really love Tupac and Biggie, you'll all get involved in archiving the evidence of the corrupt cops' wrongdoing. Action, action, action. Do something to hold them to account. Scour every case they ever touched. Hold them to account. Archive every document in the current Kefi D case. Let's compare this evidence being presented to what we already have. The prosecutors, judge, and law enforcement could possibly cut corners to put their thumbs on the scale. But after this case is finished, we can compare what they did to put them all in a similar goldfish bowl and hold them to account. In my award-winning film, Minnesota, The Modern Day Selma, we hear stories of police misconduct and the shooting deaths of young men, and we learn how police covered up their crimes. Now, this film has become a talking point for the talk that many parents have with their kids about the police. And any of you out there that haven't seen the film, I would encourage you to look at it because it's a pattern of behavior that we see in police organizations. And I'll say this, by definition, every law enforcement agency is corrupt. And why do I say that? It's about budget. They don't have the budget to do every single thing right. Because when they make a mistake, you got to pay out millions and millions of dollars, and they don't have the budget for that. So what do they have to do in order to not pay out millions and millions of dollars for just like simple, honest mistakes? They got to cover shit up, and that makes them all corrupt. Not every cop is corrupt, and we need cops. We need good cops. But by definition, every law enforcement agency in the world, not just America, is corrupt because they don't have the budget to do every single thing right. And when regular people make mistakes, they must cover that up so they don't have to pay out, millions and millions, if not billions and billions of dollars. So what do we want? We want to bring the actual murders of Christopher Wallace to justice. We want to bring the conspirators, the actual conspirators and the shooters of Tupac Shakur to justice. We want to bring the murderer of Bobby Finch to justice. We want to bring the murderers of Bruce Richardson to justice. Let's bring the conspirators and murder of Alton McDonald to justice. Let's bring all the shooters and conspirators in the many attempted murders of Suge Knight to justice. And let's bring the conspirators and murderers of so many more that are dead over all this shit to justice. So now we come down to what is going to happen to Kefi D. Well, Darnell Brim said that Kefi D liked to make up stories. Kefi D said Brim was responsible for a shooting, and the only problem was that at the time, Kefi D said that Brim was locked up, so it was impossible for him to have been the shooter. But that didn't stop Kefi D from spreading that lie. You know, facts don't stop this whole group's lies. The lies continue. Kefi D wanted to become famous. Well, now he is. He's famous. And he was working with Reggie Sr. and Reggie Jr. in the past, and they likely teamed up with the LAPD cover-up writer Lion Greg Kading to make up this story that continues to morph and change as actual facts get in the way. Remember, Orlando Anderson was said to, by the LVMPD, the Las Vegas Metro Police, said Orlando is not a suspect. And if you read Fred Reynolds' book, he tries to pin this on Orlando and says, if they just looked at the video evidence, they would have seen that it was Orlando Anderson that was the shooter. Well, maybe they did look at the video evidence, Mr. Reynolds, and they found out that Orlando wasn't the shooter, and so they came out and they said he's not a suspect. He was seen at the bar with Corey Edwards at the time of the shooting, and Russell Poole told me that there was video evidence of him at the bar. How often does a law enforcement agency come out and say somebody's not a suspect? They only say it when they have incontrovertible proof that he's not a suspect. Now, Orlando Anderson was said to have been the guy who killed Tupac. And I'm telling you, twice, Las Vegas Metro Police said Orlando Anderson is not a suspect. Orlando Anderson sued Afeni Shakur, the estate of Tupac, and got a $78,000 settlement, and he was shot the day he was supposed to go down and collect that check. So, and the story keeps on morphing. Now it's not Orlando that was in the car, it's 4 other dead people. So the story keeps changing to fit the Kading, Reggie Wright Jr., Reggie Wright Sr., Kefi D narrative. Now, Kefi D is part of the school play. Okay, his future might already be written by the collaborators. Preserve all receipts. Download every video. Hold all of the corrupt to account by making them explain away the actual facts. But let's all remember that the easel, the canvas, the paintbrushes, and the paint are all owned by the legal system. Free Michael Duro Sr., free Michael Duro Jr., free Wayman Anderson, exonerate Omar Bradley, and free Suge Knight.